Are we live? Hello, everybody. If you're there on the chat, let me know if you can see me. I'm not sure. I never know how these things work, and it's even more tricky when I'm trying to do something with the YouTube option to have multiple accounts, and I'm not even certain, you know. So I don't know. Is it working? Are we live? Hello? I don't think this is working.
We are live.
We're live. Okay, all right. Now I see that we're getting people. I guess that. Well, here we are as usual. All right, this is typical for me, as you know. So, hello, I am the RPG Pundit, the final boss at Internet Shitlords, and as you can see, I'm trying to work out this split thing that has what some people on the chat have called the kind of suggestive name of "go live together" on on YouTube live stream. But you know, it's the only way actually that you can do like a live stream on your YouTube channel with another person without having to use StreamYard or something like that I'd have no chance of knowing. So that's how it went. So the big news, I'm going to start with that because I'm guessing that's what people want to know. You might have guessed from the screen there, it's inappropriate characters. We are announcing tonight the new guest for inappropriate characters. You guys have like about a minute to type in on your chat who you think it is. I will give you a hint. It is not Dragons and Diversity and Dragons. He was going to be it, but he bowed out and we couldn't convince him to come back. And I'll also mention it's not Garibay. We tried again to ask him if he wanted to join, but no luck. As for Meatball, well, you know, she's a constant co-host. She's sitting on top of my other chair there right now. But no. And no, it's not Grim Jim coming back. I see a lot of interesting selections of names here. R.A. Salvatore, I assume, was what Mac meant. I don't know. I wouldn't know how to reach him. I don't know what the postal code is for Icewind Dale. I'm just going to grab a pipe while you guys keep guessing. And those of you who are truly observant would probably be able to guess if you're paying attention. But Condor DM. You know, Condor DM is a funny guy, right? Because just before I was banned from Twitter, he did this long, idiotic argument with me. And it's very clear that he's a guy who's never actually studied rhetoric or logic. So it's very easy to get him into a logical trap in an argument. And then his reaction is just to say, well, you know, but I'm superior and I won the argument, right? And to keep doing that over and over again until I had to block him, right? And, you know, he seemed really pissed at me at the time. So then I got banned from Twitter. And right after that, Condor DM did a video saying I shouldn't have been banned from Twitter. And he actually posted, you know, like it was very nice of him because the guy had just had a huge fight with me, one where he was trying to make this completely specious argument about how, you know, technically, like he's not denying that people in the Broasar hate Jewish people, but technically anti-Semitism isn't racism. Therefore, profit. I don't know. Like I was saying, well, does it actually change anything? If you want to say it's technically not racism, right? Like that doesn't make any difference, right? It's ridiculous. So yeah, but anyways, so he was quite mad at me, but he did this. He went and he said he defended that I shouldn't have been banned, right? So when I got back, I unblocked him. And then he started a new argument with me yesterday. And once again, I painted him into a rhetorical corner, and he was starting up again. So I blocked him again, right? And then he's talking about, see, the pundit blocked me again. I don't know what to think of that guy. Jeremy Crawford? No, not Jeremy Crawford. Carl Benjamin. Well, I wish. No offense to our future co-host who's standing in the wings right now, waiting for me to signal him. But I'd trade Carl Benjamin in for in a minute. But I don't think we're gonna get Sargon here. Maybe as a guest star. Ginny D. So anyways, okay, it looks like you guys aren't going to guess, which is really funny, because if you guys had any bonuses to your perception check, just looking at the screen, you would probably know. But because if you look over in one little corner of the screen, not where the television is that says inappropriate, or the screen that says inappropriate characters, but just off to the side, aha. So yes, the new host of Inappropriate Characters is Nerd Cognito co-host Ryan David. So Ryan, you can feel free to wheel yourself in here.
I'm totally crammed over in the corner. That took a really long time.
Thank you for your patience.
There's no way that I can live up to all of those names. I'm just telling you right now. But I want to defend Condor right now. Condor DM was the only one that was legitimately guessing the whole time. I don't think we made it very difficult for people to guess, though, Pundit.
It's true, we didn't, but yet there not a lot of people knew it. But then again, it might be that a lot of my viewers don't know who you are. So why don't you introduce yourself first of all and explain what you've done so far in gaming, and then we'll explain what you're doing in Inappropriate Characters.
Sounds good. For those of you that don't know, or those of you that don't listen, and I'm looking through the chat now, there's a lot of familiar names out there. Hello to everybody. My name's Ryan David. I have been a lifelong fan and advocate of the hobby, and through kismet and serendipity and time and effort, we put together this little show called Nerd Cognito. And Nerd Cognito is an audio-only podcast, right? We made a very distinct decision to only do audio. We didn't want to get into the YouTube realm because we had a lot of friends, a lot of creators that were in YouTube. And quite frankly, YouTube's a little saturated. And me living out my boyhood fantasies, I can be the radio guy that I always wanted to be. So audio only was the way to go. And through that podcast over the last 3 years, a little bit before, there was a predecessor podcast that some of you old timers really know that shall not be named. But once that disbanded and Nerd Cognito really took off, I started to become friends with people that were amazing creators in the space. Predominantly OSR, but not specifically OSR. We are not an OSR podcast by any means. We're just a nerd culture podcast. And with their coaxing encouragements and, cracking of the whip, they finally motivated me enough to dust off this idea of a game that I had some 20-some years ago that I'm currently developing. So I look at this as an opportunity to really talk to and sit under the learning tree of some great developers, being Pundit and Venger, some great game designers, and I tend to have some opinions that generally will align, but not always, with my fellow co-hosts. And I generally have opinions that sometimes get under the skin of some people. Pundit, did you know that this week, earlier in the week, we had top billing for about an hour on YouTube, and we got it again today? We got it again today.
Didn't see that. I've been busy.
No, it was just, I find it amazing that because folks don't have the ability to interpret criticism without contempt, we end up pulling these these interesting, I guess, perceptions of who we are. But really, I think the spirit of Inappropriate Characters is we want to talk about the things that we love for the benefit of the hobby that we love. So I am humbled and honored to be considered, and I want to bring a little of my technical expertise to the show, just to help some folks out and really just contribute as best I can to the conversation. So chat, I love you. I am thrilled that some of you have been following both the Nerd Cognito or me on Twitter and the Inappropriate Characters Twitter account, which has been dormant for a while, has been breathed back to life, so to speak. And we've had all sorts of interesting things pop up over the last week. You can look for more good content So if you're not subscribed right now to the Inappropriate Characters channel, make sure that you subscribe. Make sure that you're still subscribed to Pundit. And if you are on the evil Twitter machine, go over there and look us up on Twitter. It's at InapproPCares, just because of the Twitter limit. But you'll find us, you'll see us, and I couldn't be happier or more humbled to join the team.
All right. So now what you don't know about the rest of this live stream is that I'm going to be asking you some questions, including what might be some tough questions, right?
And I will answer them as best as I can.
You have to do them at Inappropriate Characters, right? So you're going to answer to the best of your ability, I hope.
Yep.
But before that, my first one is like, really, what did they talk about us? I obviously can't stop and look up Twitter now. So like
No. It was on a live stream. Same general folks as before. They just can't give up the ghost. So it was more about they were teasing the Inappropriate Characters launch. You know, they were very clear that they knew who the mystery host was going to be, and it was just sort of ha 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 ha. I stepped away from that whole battle a couple of weeks ago, and I just can't curate content for them anymore. So if that's where they're looking for content, it's going to be a dry well from me moving forward.
All right. So if you guys in the audience have any questions, you can feel free to ask them for either me obviously or for Ryan, but I've got a couple for my own. I guess we've got one here by Judd Gonzo. He says, "Are you now or have you ever been a member of the WotC development team?"
I have not. I wouldn't admit it if I was right now. So, we look at all of the things that could be with that IP, and I have my opinion, and I'm sure we'll hear about it on a future show, but they're doing everything in their power to tear down that IP for whatever reason. My conspiracy theory notwithstanding, it has to be a conscious effort to destroy what we all loved originally.
You think that they're doing like the producers with like D&D, that Cynthia Williams is trying to destroy it on purpose for some reason?
I think that Hasbro has outgrown Wizards of the Coast. One of the things that I do for a living, I'm in business and software, which means I'm also pretty in tune with what goes on Wall Street. And it would not be the first time that a company has an IP that is too expensive to unload and too unprofitable to maintain. So if they just let it go to the wayside, they're dumping a lot of value in the D&D name, right? And Magic the Gathering on the other end of WotC, the same thing. There's a lot tied up, but it's not producing, it's not being as successful as what I believe the parent company Hasbro has. So, they want a certain value out of it, and they're not recovering that value. So there has been a strategy employed. It's very much out of the producers, where you bang down the value of a segment of your company so that it's at an actual sellable value. I don't think that Dungeons and Dragons or Wizards of the Coast as an entity is at a saleable value. We shit on them all the time, but the truth is there's substantial value in that property.
Well, last year, Magic the Gathering was $1 billion property, right?
Right, and it's not getting the response that they really want from it anymore because of fan alienation and price point pain and distribution issues. I really think that, this is my tinfoil hat conspiracy theory. I think that Hasbro is intentionally letting the lunatics run the asylum for the benefit of driving down that cost until they can sell it at a price that people are going to be palatable to buy it at. So
that's an interesting theory. Crazy. So I don't know. I think Cynthia Williams was there. She was hired to try to make D&D into $1 billion company. and or into $1 billion brand rather, and
Right.
all of her plan, which was ill-informed from the beginning, hinged on having the OGL 1.1, on getting rid of an independent OGL. And when the pushback was way bigger than she expected from that, that has collapsed. And that was kind of the foundation stone of her entire plan for the VTT, for everything else. I think it was a real plan. But I think that now they're screwed, right? There's no way they're going to be able to make her promise come to life of making D&D a $1 billion brand.
Right. I shorted the shit out of Hasbro for the well, not for the last. I'm out now, but for the better part of 2 years and never lost money.
They're all shorting Hasbro. Yeah, I know. I don't do investing myself. I have no need, but the ones that do, they've all been shorting Hasbro. All right, so now more questions from the crowd before we get to mine. Timothy Shanks is one of our resident social justice activists, and he asks, have you ever been a member of the LGBTQ plus community?
I'm a human being. I tend to politically more align with the conservative. I'm a fiscal conservative, you know. There's no doubt about that. I have
sexuality. Hang on. Are you suggesting that conservative is a gender identity now, or what?
No. So what I'm saying is I don't identify with politics in any way.
You look a little too old now, but you could have, a few years ago, you might have been a twink for Trump or something. Who knows? That was a real movement, dude.
Oh, please. No. I don't identify with any of the what I call the lunatic alphabet right now, and it's not because I care who you fuck. I don't. I care about the way you put your message across, and it is
it's a silly question to ask, actually, but there we go. I thought I'd make light of it. Corey Simmerlock was a much more serious question. Are you now, or have you ever been in the same room as Meatball? Unless Meatball is big, I can answer that one. Unless Meatball's up to something that I really don't know about and that involves international travel, the answer is no.
I don't know. There was a picture. There were two pictures that were going around Twitter this week where Meatball and the official Nerdcognito Hound Dog were hanging out together. So
I think it was a shop. I'm not sure, but I mean, I noticed those pictures. I was like, wait a minute, what the hell? This isn't a picture of Meatball. Because one of the things I'll note here is that Ryan has been doing a bunch of because he's the new tech guy, right? We're like, Inappropriate Characters is like a rock band that has the same guys in it all the time, except for the drummer. The drummer constantly changes. Every couple of years they have to get a new drummer. And this is the case with our tech guy, right? So first it was Grim, then it was Joe. Now it's going to be Ryan. And so Ryan's taken over the Twitter, and he's been doing a lot of promotion and some cool looking promotion. But he didn't actually ask me, and I don't think he asked Venture anything about like, should I do this? I just jumped in, and that's fine because the stuff he's been producing is all right, But it was a bit of a surprise to me when I started seeing it there.
Forgiveness is far easier to achieve than permission. You know this.
Yeah, that's true. Let's see if there's anything else here.
Looking through the chat.
Some people commenting on your ideas about WotC devaluing itself on purpose. All right, so for my part, I'm gonna. Where do I start? Okay, so let's start with the fact. How do you feel about the fact that you are now going to be the third of a series of rotating co-hosts, right? Because Venture has been constant. So, like, how long do you expect that you're going to be in this job? That's the first question.
As long as we can make more money than we made the year before.
If you're hoping to make money off Inappropriate Characters, I'm afraid you've signed up for the wrong plan.
No.
Inappropriate Characters, like, we do have, unlike my channel, which, by the way, to everybody watching, I don't have super chat. I have there are some issues that make it complicated for me to get it because it's because I'm based in South America. So if you guys want to like do the equivalent of a super chat, you've got a couple of options. You can check out in the description of this video. You just go to where it says show more or whatever, and you expand it. You've got links to all of my products, including my RPG Pundit Presents series and everything like that. So you can just pick up one of my books. My books are well worth it. You're going to really enjoy them. And then it's like you're giving me a super chat, but you're also getting something in return, right? And if you don't really want anything in return, then you can go to my Patreon, where I do nothing. But it's the place where if you've got all my books, or you don't want all my books, but you still want to back me up, right, to give me some support, then that's where you can do it. You can just throw some Patreon money at me. So unlike me, though, in Inappropriate Characters, because I'm not, I'm not the owner there, it means that they do have, super chats, and we do have a Patreon. But I can tell you guys with absolute honesty that the money that Inappropriate Characters makes is very small. I think like once you split it 3 ways, it like probably works out to less than $20 in a month, right? So it's
right.
It's
my goal.
I mean, even the money I make with YouTube is nothing in the sense of like ad revenue, right? Like, this is, none of us are influencers of sufficient size to end up being able to live off YouTube cash,
All kidding aside, I just hope that we can cover the cost of the StreamYard and maybe $8 thrown the way of Elon Musk just to get our word out, right? One of the things that we really want to bring in is a platform, being StreamYard or Restream. I'm leaning towards StreamYard, that can allow us to have an authentic interaction with our live guests. The chat is so important. And, if we cover that cost, then I am tickled pink. So how long am I going to be around? Well, just like everything else, it's going to be as long as it's going to be a good fit. And that's a two-way door too, right? It might not be a good fit on your end or on my end. And
so far, one of your two predecessors was, he left out of an ideological disagreement with me in the middle of the pandemic, right? The other one didn't. The other one left for personal reasons. It was nothing to do with either me or Benji, right? But
right.
There you go. It's a 50% chance that you'll be leaving because you disagree with me about, I don't know, Ukraine or something. I don't know, whatever it'll be. Whatever the next perma crisis that the establishment creates will be.
I don't see that happening because I am very much, and lots of friendly faces in the chat. What's up, everybody? The folks that know me, both on, the internet persona and behind the scenes, know that whether we agree or we disagree, it doesn't mean that we can't still talk to each other and listen to each other's perspective. and I have a great relationship with Grim.
We're totally polar opposites ideologically, right? But we were talking.
I politically agree with Grim on like 10% of stuff.
Yeah, so. Me too. That was fine until he became one of these guys that was just obsessed with COVID. So there was no reasoning with him. That was the end game right there. All right, so somebody here asked, I think Ben was asking, are you going to promise to make Inappropriate Characters a $1 billion brand?
Ben, go buy a lottery ticket, because that's what I'm going to have to do too. I'm going to do my best to make it our own show, right? Sure, I'm the drummer coming in, but we want to make it unique to this set of 3.
Well, and yeah, exactly. I mean, the first batch of Inappropriate Characters where Grim was the tech guy was very different from the one with Joe, but I'm imagining that this one will also be different too, because the third person in question has never just been like the guy in the background that you barely hear, right? He's always been an equal participant with me and Benji. So he just happens to also be the guy that actually knows how to make a live stream work. So that's the goal here. Let me see here. So, okay. So what's your personal history? This is a question from me. What is your personal history in games? And you've lately been talking a lot about the OSR, right? But what I want to know is, have you been gaming long enough that when you started, it was before 2nd edition D&D? And also, how early or late did you get into the OSR? And what were you playing in between that?
Okay. It's funny because I did a segment with Grim. We were just talking about him where he asked the same question. So I'm well rehearsed on this one. Truth of the matter is I've been playing since childhood. I could tell the story, but I won't bore you with it. I was a snot-nosed 7-year-old kid. Here's the short version. And the older teens in the neighborhood were playing Advanced. And they didn't want me there, but like all good gamers, they brought me in.
First or second edition?
First
Okay,
edition.
1989.
Yes. I was literally like 10 years old. And I was able to sort of watch, and then eventually I earned their trust, and they let me, run a monster here and there, but I wouldn't call it playing. Later, turn of the 90s, so second was out. We still had the advanced stuff, and it was those awkward middle years where everyone's in like junior high and trying to figure stuff out. We started with advanced and then migrated to second. So the OSR feel for things is newer to me within the last 10 years. I played that through second. And like I said, when I was talking about Nerd Cognito, we're not explicitly this OSR podcast, right?
You aren't even just an RPG podcast, right?
We're not even just an RPG podcast, right? We cover the gamut, but we really have just sort of rode the current with whatever we were playing. So we went through second, we went through third, through the bloat. We even held our nose and tried fourth. In between all of that stuff, we were playing other things that now we know are fond in people's hearts. Again, not necessarily OSR products, but things like Traveler and Cyberpunk and those sorts of things. We're just freaking nerds that enjoy getting together and playing a game. When things sort of shifted at the launch of 5th edition, we weren't happy with 5th edition, and we took a step back. And I take shit for this online all the time, but I still say we had a good time at the table with it. We played some 13th Age in lieu of 5th edition, but we were also, at that point in time, we're looking at like 2014, 2015, starting to really get this influx of reborn products. And over that period of time, the last 10 years, I've really looked back at not just, I don't want to say simplicity, but it's elegance that those systems bring, because it's how we played and it's how the games that we enjoyed riding those tides have come to be. They picked and stole and borrowed from the things that they remembered and created the games that were great for us. So we got a chance to look back at things like BX, and then we got DCC, which is phenomenal. And we're really split. We'll play anything at my tables. I'm not married to a game. My last major long-term campaign just ended 2 weeks ago. We ran for 7 years. It was under DCC. So, that I don't have a definitive, I play this. And I'm okay with that.
I mean, I think most older gamers are like that, right? Like, I mean, almost everybody who was an RPG gamer since the 80s or early 90s that's still gaming today probably played hundreds of RPGs. Like I said, once upon a time there was tons of them, and I think somebody once challenged me and said, "Well, what have you played that you're so good at that?" I had to like do this gigantic paragraph of like everything to run, almost everything under the sun, right? Okay.
No, I don't let on that I'm as old as I am.
All right. So we got first, before I continue with my questions, we got some more comments here. Bob Beckna is, I think, saying to me, he's congratulating me. He says, "Congratulations on your award for world's worst super chat grifter." Well, that's fair. That's true. I know that there's a way I could actually get like super chat on here. And maybe now that I've committed to doing more live streams, I might like really try to do that. But it like, it involves an enormous amount of paperwork. I can't tell you guys. I love living in this country, but one of the things that is just unbelievable is the levels of paperwork you have to do with the government for anything, right? So it's really annoying. Anyway, Timothy Shank says, well, $20 for an hour once a month is rich. Yeah, but Venger is the only one who does it for only an hour. The rest of us do it for like an hour and a half to 2 hours.
We got to get Venger to stay up a little bit later. Maybe we'll bang back the time.
Trying to for years now, yeah. Ironcaster predicts the unexpected thing that will break you guys apart: cheesesteak. I don't know if that's an inside joke or just randomness, but
yeah, that's an inside joke. Friend of yours, you've had him on IC before. T-shirted historian. I do his The Weekend Geek, and there was a very heated debate about cheesesteak outside of South Philly and South Jersey, and I had to represent some South Jersey for that battle, and I won that battle. The only definitive answer that goes on a cheesesteak is onions and cheese whiz. Period. End of statement. We're not talking about it anymore.
All right, fair enough. I have no strong opinions on cheesesteak, just in case you were wondering. Steve Roberts says, but who is going to mute the beginning of every stream now that Job is gone? Yeah, well, this is a question, right? Because in the entire history of inappropriate characters, we have never managed to successfully start a program, right? Like we've always had technical issues at the beginning of every program. And that's partly because because we're not using something simple like StreamYard, because both Grim Jim and Job use like Google Meetups to do this and then try to cast it on. I don't know how it's magic to me, right? Ironically, magic to me is not magic, but this is magic to me, right? Like it's a complete mystery how it's done. But they were like trying to put on, they would always have some issue with the sound or with the video or with something where it just wouldn't connect, every single time. So are you, maybe you're not promising that we're going to be $1 billion brand, but are you promising that now we're going to actually start at the time we start without technical difficulties?
We should. Now I'm giving myself a patting of the first episode, right?
Yeah, okay. First time
we should start somewhere on time. I did a fancy little After Effects render, so we've got our own countdown and everything. But no, we should start on time, and this is where the support of the fans in the chat really come through. Pundit doesn't have those super chats, but you can go over to IC and offline tip a little bit. We want to raise enough just to cover the cost of StreamYard. We know we're not making a ton, but every dollar helps. So if you can help get us there and get that duck off the screen so we're not using the free version, we are eternally thankful. And I will do my best to promise in exchange for your hard-earned dollar that we will start the stream on time with everybody properly in the mute or unmute state.
Let's see if we manage it. Okay, so I'm going to do my second question here. Now, like I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that you are the originator of the term sparkle troll, which is a term that has become very popular. I've seen so many people use it, right? It's one that I never quite understand, but it does seem to annoy the right people, so I'll give you credit for that. But I've seen you use another term, and I was wondering if that one was also your invention or if you picked that up somewhere else, which is the faux SR. Was that you, or was that like Black Lodge or someone who did that?
No, I tend to make up a word once a year that tends to rub people's rhubarbs the entirely wrong way. Sparkle Troll was last year, and Faux SR is this year, hence the hate stream from earlier this week. But no, that was mine, and both of them came about very conversationally. It was a conversation that we were having, and it just flew out of my mouth, and through Kismet, it stuck. And it's stuck because it's apt, right? It has a little bit of the glib, so you remember it. But it's not just, oh, we're woke, or, oh, we do this or try to do this. It's the combination of all of those things in the hobby, at least with Sparkle Troll. Faux SR I was really irritated with people talking out of both sides of their mouth when it came to the OSR. Like I said, I'm not married to the OSR, but if you're going to be OSR, you got to dedicate yourself to OSR. You don't slap that label on a product. You got on me for this, and just go with it. And there are folks that throw it around casually, either for subscriptions or for marketing or both. And it didn't sit right with me. So,
all right, so
instead of,
I was going to ask, what is are you defining FOSR? Because I believe that your intention was to suggest that that it's something that that obviously has been a very real phenomenon, which is originally it was people making games. Like this is something that back when there weren't a lot of, apart like from me and maybe Grim, there weren't a lot of people doing YouTube stuff yet. But there were,
Right.
But the OSR was rising in popularity in the second wave and the beginning of the third wave of the OSR, and you had people that were saying, "Yeah, this is an OSR game." Sometimes they would literally say it's an OSR game. Sometimes they put it in the OSR category and drive-through and stuff like that. And you look, and it's definitely not an OSR game in the mechanical sense, right? Not any kind of judgment about its vague general old school feel or something like that, right?
Right.
Sometimes they would try to argue, "Oh no, but it has old school spirit," right? But it's like using a dice pool or something, right? Like, I mean, Venger was guilty of this, right? With Alpha Blue, with the Alpha Blue rules, those were not OSR rules, but he kept trying to pretend Alpha Blue was an OSR product until he started doing Chult. And Chult is an OSR product because he started using this kind of ultralight D&D based mechanic for the Chult books. And that's really OSR product. And the one he'd done before, the Islands of Purple Haunted Putrescence, was an OSR product, ironically. But then when he did Alpha Blue, he wanted to do some weird rules. But I was wondering if that's the limit of it, or if like that definition of FOSR extends into other stuff. Like you're talking about YouTubers. So what would be a FOSR? I mean, you don't have to name a name, but give an example of the type of channel that you would think of as a FOSR channel as opposed to an OSR channel.
I don't even want to go to the channel specific thing. It's just folks that are throwing it out there for clicks or credit, and that's it. And it's across the board, from game designers to I guess we would influencers. I hate that word. But folks that are looking to build a brand,
Right.
and it's very easy because we're a captive audience, right? We are a captive labeled audience. So if we say, "Hey, this is great, the OSR is going to love it," you are cashing in on that phrase, whether or not you live it, eat it, sleep it, play it sometimes, don't play it sometimes, split your focus between your development here and here. Just be honest. And this recent schism that's bubbled up, I think, is a long time coming, because people are starting to see through the lack of honesty. And I really, there have been people that legitimately I considered friends that have broken off because they felt targeted or attacked by that statement. Throughout the entire time, even with the inception of that phrase, I never named a single person. They all owned it on their own. So apparently the phrase was very apt, right? Because boom, that's me. I'm angry because that's me. How dare you say this sort of thing? But yeah, it's folks that are wearing the mask for gain in some element, one place or another, and it just didn't sit right with me. I don't have a dog in the race, right? My product is probably set to come out first quarter next year, so I'm long ways off. I just, as someone that really has grown to love specifically the OSR corner of the hobby, I don't want it diminished by people that are just throwing it around willy-nilly, And so I said that. It was a one-off. It was one episode of Nerd Cognito, and I thought it was going to ride into the sunset, and then people got it.
Yeah. Now, I mean, because there are certain things that you could, I think that term can be defined in a lot of different ways beyond maybe the ones that you were thinking of too, right? Like, I would say that the woke OSR, the Sword Dream, is a type of faux OSR, right? Because it doesn't really I think a lot of those people are old story gamers that are making products that might technically, like mechanically, be OSR, but they very clearly have the purpose of kind of undermining a lot of the essence of the OSR. But what I was gonna say is that I do think, obviously, like I don't think that someone has to be exclusively an OSR designer to design an OSR game, right? And
Not
if
at all.
you design an OSR game, you're doing something, you're producing something in the OSR, right? And so then that's legitimate.
Absolutely.
And you can be other games that aren't. I mean, most of Grimjim's products are not OSR, but he wrote a very good OSR game, which was Machinations of the Space Princess.
Right.
But I do think also that like the influencer thing is a significant issue. Ironcaster says influencer. He's on our chat here. He says influencers is cringe's community. Yeah, it is. But the thing is, here at this moment, it becomes something that's kind of useful as a term, because for a long time the OSR has been driven by largely by the people that design OSR games, right? So people that actually make the OSR games were the people that had, if you wanted to say influence, right? They were the people that had influence over the OSR, which is different from, say, 5th edition D&D, where the people that designed 5th edition D&D have almost no influence, right? And even a lot of the people that write for WotC now, though they don't deserve any influence, they have very little influence. The people that have the most influence, ironically, in the 5e community are the people that have YouTube channels about 5e. And some of these are people that have been playing D&D, like that they never played an RPG until like 6 months ago. And now they've got a channel, and they, if they're an attractive young lady, they might have, 150,000 subscribers or something like that,
Oh my gosh, I'm burned out. I DM'd for 18 months. Try 18 years, bitch.
That's right. So we all know who we're talking about here. But, now there have been certain channels that have been showing up that are run by people. Now, I'm not saying that these aren't necessarily people that are playing OSR games. A lot of them are. I think most of them are. And that they have legitimate things to say about the OSR. And some of their channels I find really interesting, right? Like I find Diversity and Dragons is a really interesting channel. Black Lodge is a really interesting channel. The Basic Expert is an interesting channel, right? Like when he does live streams, they're interesting. Those are all good channels, and there are lots of others I could name, right? And then some of these guys are becoming OSR publishers. The Red Room started as a channel, and now they're trying to compete with me for the most OSR products. They're still a good ways away, but they're catching up to me pretty damn fast. They're
freaking machines, man, as fast as they churn it out.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess that when you're in Portugal, you don't have much else to do. But anyway, so there are some of these people that become designers, right? But I think there's a real difference that exists between when, like, your involvement or your let's say your notoriety in the OSR is just based on having a YouTube channel versus based on having made games, and that also ends up creating different priorities, which is part of what we found out in this past month with this whole thing with the Bro SR, which is an anti-OSR movement. Just like Sword Dream was an anti-OSR movement, right? And the people who are mainly designers recognize, look, you've got this movement that says don't play anything except AD&D First Edition, right? That's an anti-OSR movement. It's not in favor of the development of the OSR in new and interesting directions. It's a retrograde movement, and so if you're a designer, you're like, well, why should we listen to anything they have to say, right? But if you're an influencer and they're gonna, I don't know, however many actual people Jeffro Johnson has following him, whether it's 25 or 40 or whatever, you think, oh, I might get those as subscribers. Suddenly you have an agenda where you're going to be perhaps more willing to overlook some of the really ugly side of that movement, So, FOSR has some point there, right? Timothy Shanks here says, FOSR are the 5e guys who shave off 5e stat blocks and try to tell us it's an OSR product. Yeah. Well, the funny thing is 5e has a huge community of third-party products, and there are some people that I'm sure are extremely successful at 5e products. I don't know who they are because I don't even look at that stuff, right? But I'm sure that they have people that are probably as prolific as I am in the OSR for 5e and that are probably making a lot of money off it and everything else, right? So,
and they're not bad products either. They have great ideas at the core. It's just running through a terrible system. I talk to them because, again, not an OSR podcast. So I've seen great stuff.
We're going to get to the 5e system later on, but the OSR, like, I don't know why someone who's doing really well in 5, except maybe if like they want to see more indie, right? Ironically, like, indie gaming used to be all of these like weirdo story gamer hipsters, except they were never very successful, right? The OSR is the most successful indie gaming movement of all time. And so maybe what they want is this kind of punk cred that OSR has. I don't know. That would be the only that they would go from doing 5e stuff to doing OSR stuff, but it could be. Ben says, who'd win in a fight between Sword Dream and the Bro SR? Well, since Sword Dream, or like, the woke SR can't even get a coherent movement together, I guess they'd lose. Let's see here. Sword Dream never really made it out of its sheath, yeah. Ginny makes her living from it now, lols, Brian. That's Brian in the bunker. Charles Anderson says, what are your thoughts on Bunnies and Burrows, published in 1976? Is it OSR? No, it's an old school game. If you're talking about an actual game that was published before, let's say, 1988, you can say that any of those are old school games. If someone were to make a product that was derivative of Bunnies and Burrows today, it would be an old school gaming product that would be based on Bunnies and Burrows, and that would be, for me, as a design school, OSR is based on D&D, but there are other movements that have absolutely made old school revivalisms of these other games. For example, Traveller, right? The Cephas engine is an old school revival of Traveller, right? And those are awesome too, right? You can like all of those, right? They're it's really great when people do that, right? Timothy Shank says, I have no use for influencers whose only goal is to put out content. What the fuck? Yeah, well, that's when you start, when you don't have books that you can present to people, then you only have a brand that you can present to people, right?
No, I think your point is very apt and right on the mark, especially when we talk about classic stuff like Traveller. We need, I guess, we're in the age of labels, right? We need a label. Just call it classic gaming. What's wrong with classic gaming? There's nothing wrong with classic gaming. It inspires feelings of what you had. It brings those root sort of styles and systems and the atmosphere from your table in. It doesn't have to be OSR. If you need another label, give it another label. How about we just focus on making good games, and they fall wherever they fall, and not lean on things as this brand identity. That's classic gaming. Someone make me a logo.
Like having an old school revival of Traveller or any other old game. The OSR does not demand that you only play D&D based games, right? Like those other games are awesome too. Timothy Shank says, new game. Anytime the pundit mentions Bro SR or Jeff Road, take a drink. All right. Nick Mayhew says, nice Masonic pin. Good to see a brother. Keep making videos. I enjoy watching. Thank you, Nick. All right. So now I do have to ask about something that, one of the things that I think was a little bit of a debate that happened around your person was that you had, there was some guy on Twitter that was, I guess in an after school program or something like this, teaching kids, or not supervising, I guess like a D&D club or something, and they were playing fifth edition. And you basically called him a groomer. So like, what was the deal with that?
Well, according to the narrative, I called him a groomer.
Did you ever use that word yourself?
No, I did use the word groomer, but I would call back to before any of the tweets or any of the secret discussions on Discord channels somewhere. It was everything I've done is out in the open, right? And it's in the archives. You could go and listen to the show on Nerdcognito. Before I was in software, I was a public educator for 20 years. And I have teacher friends. There is a teacher that played at my table right over there in the other room for a handful of years. And she was sponsoring the 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons Club. Now, there is another personality that has a reasonable following that also DMs for whatever the school is. But I was very specific. I said, it's a teacher that is doing this. It is a teacher that is also putting in a lot of other shit that doesn't belong in the game, like CRT and like some of the gender studies stuff that's going on right now. And that's where
that's the guy on Twitter. That was the guy on Twitter that you called out. Is that who you're talking about?
Not the guy on Twitter, the teacher that is my friend that I was referring to. Now, this guy on Twitter who happens to DM for kids said, "Oh, DMing in a school, he's talking about me." And again, we have mutual friends and mutual acquaintances. They came out and said, "Why are you talking about this person?" I said, "I'm not. Listen to the show. I'm talking about, unless he's female now and a teacher now, both of which, to my knowledge, he's not. This isn't the person I was talking about." Well, that was just another sort of talking point for them. And because I quit talking about it, because I said, look, here's my final word on this. I'm not going to go back down this road. The story that is out there is, well, RD called this guy a groomer. But you can go back in the archives. It's there. You can listen to it. I own every word that I said. And absolutely, she is preparing the students the way that a groomer would. And I would say that to her, and she wouldn't like it, but she doesn't have to like it. So check the archives. That's all I can say. The spin is amazing. And it's the same core group of like 4 or 5 people that are doing it that gave us the top billing on these streams this week where we weren't even present. So
we live rent-free in certain people's heads.
We still are. Like I thought Monday was going to be the nail in the coffin for them, and they were just going to move by and move on down the road. But then this one popped up, and it was within like the first 5% of the stream. Boom, there it is. Hey, we know what's going to happen with the inappropriate whatever. GF, get fucked.
So for the record, running D&D does not make you a groomer. Is that right? Running
D&D does not make you a groomer by any stretch of the imagination.
Including if it's 5th edition.
Including if it's 5th edition.
All
now,
right.
It makes you have questionable choices with your game. And I do question, why would you influence the students in this way? Oh, well, this is the curriculum. Well, it's a club. It's after school. And teacher administrator 20 years, I sort of know how that goes. You can make those changes really easily, especially if, as this person is claiming, oh, they were begging me to come in and do this. Well, if they're begging you to come in and do it, you get to set the terms.
So you do know that you're talking to one of the creators of 5th edition, right?
I do. And like I said, we're not always going to agree. When 5th edition came out, that's when I went down that 13th age path. And it's okay because we can still have a beer after the stream and it's not going to impact our relationship just because we have a reasonable disagreement.
Because, I mean, one of the qualities of 5th edition, ironically, and I maybe this is also part of the reason why certain 5e third-party creators are like dipping into doing OSR stuff. I mean, the only one that really stands out to me right now is I always forget her name, the person that made Shadow Dark, which that was a hugely successful Kickstarter, which partly did that with marketing the 5e style of like focusing on, you know, getting promotion from big influencers. But you know, that is, Shadow Dark is definitely an OSR game, right? But before
it's an OSR game that I don't understand, but it's OSR.
It's not a particularly sophisticated, like it's not a wildly innovative game. It's very much in the classic kind of second wave OSR style. But she before that, she'd only done 5th edition third-party products, and apparently was very well known in like the 5th edition community for those products, in that they were supposedly quite good. Right? I haven't looked at any of them, I don't know one way or the other, but I'm willing to believe that. And so like one of the things about 5th edition is that it's actually the game that the edition of D&D that Wizards did that has the most OSR influence in it, right? Like 3rd edition was made before there was an OSR.
Right.
4th edition was mainly influenced by the story gaming movement, or rather by Forge theory, and that's why it was an absolute disaster, you know, in terms of the finances of it. And then for 5th edition, you know, the people that were brought in to consult on it, several of them were OSR people, right? Me, Zach, and S. John Ross, right? That people tend to overlook, but who was one of the early influences on the OSR. So yeah, I mean, the 5th edition attempted to be a callback to a more classic style with, you know, a lot of stuff that it obviously isn't OSR, right? That very clearly is not OSR. But, you know, one of the things that it had as a trait was that it was meant to be very easily modified, right? The goal, you know, Mike Merles and I talked about this, and I've said it many times now. Guide for 5th edition, which I happen to have right here, right? It's, first of all, it's probably, I mean, not probably, I would say unquestionably, it's the second best DMG that has ever been an official DMG of Dungeons and Dragons. Only the 1st edition AD&D DMG is probably, yeah, well, it is definitely better. But it's, you know, it's full of options. It's full of ways to modify your game, right? And that's what makes it so good. But the problem was that nobody who played 5th edition wanted to modify their game. They're all little Jeffros. They wanted rules as written, 5th edition, right? So the first they'd ask, like Jeremy Crawford, who was a second rank participant in the creation of 5th edition, you know, to clarify rules for them, and then that would be it. You know, that would be the official position. You know, it's very weird. Okay, so changing the topic here, Sylvain Durand has a question. I guess this is for you. Maybe it's for me. I don't know, but we'll assume it's for the guests. What would be on your respective appendix N? Maybe it's for both of us. I don't know.
Shit. I appendix N just makes me cringe because it gives me visions of the bros chanting it in their circle jerk. How about if we bunt and say what would be your tenets for a great game period? How's that sound?
Well, I don't know if that's accurate to the question, because obviously the point of Appendix N is that that was the list of books and influences that Gary Gygax thought was cool, right? That was basically all it was. It was a list of books.
I don't want to shit on Gygax, right? And I don't want to give a tip of the hat to the bros. How about my gaming influences as far as materials? Is that a better way to phrase it?
Stuff that isn't from gaming, like stuff that's in literature or in movies or TV shows or whatever, right? That influence your DMing, let's say, or your game design ideas.
For me, I think that Lovecraft is a huge inspiration. If you could look around, there's a picture of the man right above the monitor in the back. I've got a page of Call of Cthulhu with Cthulhu stamped on it in front of me, hung here. Lovecraft is huge. I've always been a fan of cosmic horror in general.
Now, it looks like.
Yeah. I mean, there it is. So, that is right up there at the top of the list. When I was young, I was an only child, so gaming with a group wasn't always a possibility, but I became a big fan of the Steve Jackson sorcery books, if you guys remember those.
Steve Jackson, and they were awesome.
Yeah, it was spectacular. I got one at a secondhand sale that just happened. I played it out of order. It was the third book, the third of 4, and I was hooked, right? So then I went back and got the other ones, and I got the Super Designer Sorcery Spell Book and that sort of thing. From media, I've always been a huge horror fan as well. So I do tend to skew darker, and that influences what I do at the table. What else would be a great influence? Pretty avid video gamer. I think anyone that listens to the show knows that. Core video games that were pretty influential for me from youth through adulthood. We got Dragon Quest. We've got, I'll just try to throw one out there from each generation of games. So Dragon Quest and the 16-bit Final Fantasies, moving into little deeper stuff like the Castlevania series, Eternal Darkness, which is the game that everybody forgets that is the absolute best GameCube game ever. Again, very cosmic horror. But those sort of things influence just the way that I do things. And I was a student of Andy Kaufman, and I love the swerve. So that is always prevalent in the stuff that I run. Watch out if you're a player. That's all I've got to say. So I think that sort of covers a wide enough swath without having to label it Appendix N, because I'm still bristly with that. But it gives you some background.
As a fan of, Lovecraftian stuff, you don't think that's like a dead horse that's been beaten into a fine paste? You don't think it's been done to death at this point?
Not at all, because I look at the original Lovecraft works as a foundation. And there have been derivative works from that go on and on and on and continue to be produced. That I don't think that it's a dead horse, because we are talking such, when you look at the Lovecraft universe and the Elder Gods, there's such scale and so many different avenues that you can still create new from within that universe, that it's not done. If it's done poorly or just slapdash, then yeah, it might be played out. But cultists only get old if you allow their rituals to get old. If you're changing up who they're praying to and what they're doing and what their ultimate motivation is, right? We know what the Elder Gods' motivation are. They're going to eat the world, period. In some aspect, that's what they want on the most base level. But you have to look at, why is humanity embracing this? And then you got fun things like, what are great ways to make people go insane?
Well, that's an interesting thing too, though, is that, like, I quite liked Lovecraft stories. I've read a lot of them, and obviously I've certainly done stuff with Lovecraft. As I've run Call of Cthulhu several times in more than one version. I've had Cthulhu-like stuff in my campaigns, but I do feel that now it's like just been so, like, once you have like Cthulhu plushie dolls, but also at a deeper level than that, right? Cthulhu is existential horror of the modernist age, right? It's about that cosmic meaninglessness that comes after the death of God, right? In a way, it's very Nietzschean in terms of it taps into the exact civilizational crisis that Nietzsche predicted would happen when you no longer actually, you can't actually relate to the paradigm of the Judeo-Christian framework of Western civilization, right? Which is that in a modernism has a lot of really good traits, but one of the things that it doesn't provide is a sense of real cosmic order, right? On the contrary, it suggests that humanity is meaningless in the bigger scale of things, right?
Right.
And that was really effective in the modernist world, but we don't live in the modernist world anymore. We live in this postmodernist world where, like, you know, if you're a postmodernist, and most people, certainly most people younger than Gen X at this point, but there's a lot of Gen Xers and boomers too, right, that fall into this, have a fundamentally postmodern paradigm. And for them, you know, like, okay, yeah, Cthulhu is tentacle monsters, but that was never the point of what Lovecraft was trying to get to, right?
No.
So Cthulhu is tentacle monsters, and tentacle monsters can be scary, I guess. But when they look at, like, oh, the meaninglessness of the world, that they're all Cthulhu cultists now, right? Like, they all literally think that there is no actual truth, there is no fundamental reality, and so therefore you can create this narrative out of your own insanity, right? So, like, this is they have become the cultists that Lovecraft was afraid that the world would become, you know?
I was going to interrupt you and say we're living it, right? So,
exactly. So, like, as horror, it doesn't really work in that sense anymore. And that the only thing that's kind of spooky is that, you know, these monsters want to eat you, but they're the deeper metaphysical spookiness of Lovecraft would fly over their heads completely, you know?
right. And Cthulhu, you know, everybody loves it, but it's certainly not in my top list of creepy elder cosmic horror gods. You know, there's a lot of deeper material, some of it from Lovecraft, some of it from those that took the mantle and ran with it afterwards, that are better fit for a modern audience. And I challenge you, I seriously challenge you to find something that is in text right now that can compare with, like, a journey to the Dreamlands and seeing Hypnos and understanding
that
his
is a very
motivation.
huge part of the mythos, without a doubt. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a lot more out there than just, oh, he's cute, he's got tentacles, you know.
Well, as far as what my appendix N would be, it's funny because this is something where, you know, it was one of my, like, one of the things about the Bro SR and Jethro Johnson is that before he ever decided that first edition AD&D was the one true way, he was actually, you know, back in the old Google Plus days, he was pushing this idea that actually Appendix N is the secret key to understanding this kind of D&D that he wanted to imagine, you know, this D&D that existed before any D&D was published, you know, and something like that. And he was treating it as though this was like a divine, like Appendix N alone. Now he's decided the whole thing is like a divine inspiration, but Appendix N alone was the first thing he was obsessed with. And I was like looking at this, I was going, look, okay, Appendix N is a list of fairly good fantasy and science fiction stories that Gary Gygax liked, and there's a lot of them are very good. I've read a lot of them, and a lot of them I quite enjoy, right? But, like, you know, when he was like trying to argue that that civilization went wrong when we turned away from this stuff, like, that stuff is the last kind of detritus of popular folklore, I guess you could say, like, it done in the format of this, you know, the very flawed format of the modern novel. That is, you know, that's not the foundation of civilization, dude. You know, like, so, like, I was arguing that. I say, look, my Appendix N is like, you know, the Arthurian cycle, the Mahabharata, you know, the Romance of the Three Kingdoms, you know, like the Greek and Roman myths, you know, the stories in the Bible, right? It's, you know, medieval history. It's folklore and legends of ancient times. You know, it's like that stuff is vastly more profound than Three Hearts and Three Lions, or like than Lankmar, or Conan. Like I know that nerds think that that's like profound fiction, but it's not really. Like it's entertainment. But when you like compare that to the stuff that actually came before, it's not nearly as significant. So like all of my products tend to be inspired by stuff that predates the creation of the modern novel sometime around the 17th, early 18th century. Like I've been very public in my opinion that it's called the novel because it's still relatively new. It's only about 300 years old, and we're still not really sure. But I think on the whole, although there's been some good stuff, it was probably a mistake. The novel was a mistake. Because it replaced myth and legend, and it replaced folklore. And those things are much more important. But there you go. That's my view on Appendix N. Curse of Yig says, I've finished a couple of big campaigns with 5e. People ended up 12th or 13th level. I thought it was fine. WotC is what turns me off of 5e, not the system. Yeah, I mean the 3 core books of 5e are perfectly fine,
They're accessible, and I think that was sort of, and I don't know, you would speak better to this than I do. I think that when you read through them and look through them, that was, at least in my opinion, it portrays as one of the core things that was pronounced. We're going to make this accessible.
Yeah, the point of 5e was that it was designed in such a way that the casual player, the guy who has not read the whole book, or all 3 of the books or whatever, has not meticulously pored over the rules, can play the game and will not be severely disadvantaged if there's a guy at the table who is one of those dudes who studied every detail of the game. Like it's meant to be very easy to pick up and to play, even if you're not going to put in this kind of insane commitment of becoming an obsessive about the system.
Right.
We've got Chris Miller, the Mad Scribe Games here, one of my publishers. Nice to see you, Chris. I can mention that fairly soon the next supplement, which for Sword and Caravan is going to be coming out. It's called Wilderlands, and it's going to be it's going to have Wilderland encounter tables and details for if you're running a Sword and Caravan type of campaign. When you go off the Silk Road and into the wilds, don't forget to check out Sword and Caravan. It's an excellent campaign book of adventuring during the Third Crusade and along the Silk Road in the late 12th and early 13th centuries. And Chris Miller is also doing Mad Scribe magazine. So for people who like Dragon magazine and still miss it, you should check out. I think Mad Scribe number 2 is going to be coming out sometime quite soon. Mad Scribe number 1 came out recently. I didn't have much of anything to do with that except that I've contributed articles. But it's a very good magazine if you want to have like an old style gaming magazine. It's a great option to check out. Let's see what else people are saying. People are talking about 5e. A lot of conversation about 5e, apparently. Timothy Shank said, I spent a while collecting some of the Appendix N novels. Some of them really suck. Some of the more popular ones I tried to read in the 80s were great, though. Well, one of the funny things that happened with D&D is that after there's a before and after of when D&D became popular, right, in the late 70s. And D&D was influenced by a bunch of fantasy novels from the 50s, 60s, and early 70s. And then in turn, D&D ended up having an enormous influence on fantasy novels after D&D. And of course, video games, a lot of them were based on D&D, right? So in a way, it's become this like internalized cycle, right? Where like there's stuff that comes out for D&D that is inspired by video games or novels that were inspired by D&D, right? It's becoming a kind of like this self-contained unit, which in some ways kind of, I think, diminishes a lot of the potential of D&D, at least in the mainstream publications because it's become its own genre, right? So it becomes in certain way calcified, you know.
You say self-contained unit. I say Ouroboros because it's really the snake eating its own tail right now.
It absolutely is. You're right. Giant Slayer Game says, good to see you boys. Don't have time to catch the stream right now, but I want to stop by to show my support. Thank you, Giant Slayer Games.
What's up, Giant Slayer?
Giant Slayer are, if I'm not mistaken, have now got their store up. It's another place where you can, where if you're a designer, you can put your games up and sell them there. I believe they do both PDF and print, so it's worth checking out. I know that there's a lot of people that are on there. I've been having a little bit of a conversation with them about possibly doing something with them. We'll have to see, though.
And if you're a minis person, check out his minis are spectacular.
Yeah, that's right. Chris Miller says, lots of fantasy books and movies prior to D&D that might have influenced the creation of D&D suck by our post-D&D standards. Gygax didn't have much to go on beyond ancient Greek Norse myth. Yeah. Reziel says, I freaking love Nyarlathotep. Okay. Let's see here. Ed Stanek has a question. Aside from your own works, do you have a favorite OSR system? So you can go first, Ryan. Tell me what your favorite OSR system is.
Well, that's easy because I don't have any own works that are out right now. Part of the joy for me is like I said, sitting under the learning tree of Pundit and Venger and having access to maybe bounce an idea off of them here and there. Favorite OSR stuff that's out there right now. There's so much. I'm gonna go with my default, and it's basic fantasy. And the reason that I choose basic fantasy is because, again, access for everybody. It's. I mean, they're genius, right? They're selling the books at cost, which means that each and every one of us, myself included, and I do it at least once or twice a year, not to toot my own horn, but because I want to see this stuff accessible for the next folks that are going to sit down at a table and play. The stuff is so ungodly inexpensive. You could pick it up and give it to your local library, and it gives them a great OSR core. And the wonderful thing with OSR is so much of it is interchangeable. You can take basic fantasy and an idea that you see in a quick start or in a book that you have and craft it into your campaign world. So it seems like a cop-out answer, but it's legit. They've done a very good job at making the bare bones foundation stuff accessible for everybody. So I give them props.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's a perfectly legitimate answer. I mean, it's one of the things that I was talking about just recently. There's this big thread that I did on Twitter about because somebody was commenting that they didn't think OSR is a design school, right? I said no, it is a design school, and I mean that's central to the whole existence of the OSR. And one of the things that has made it such a successful design school is that it has this principle, this box of the most core fundamental essence of D&D, and every game to be OSR has to fit within that box, right? But then inside that box, you can do all kinds of crazy stuff. But what it means is that having that box directs your creativity in a certain way, and then also it creates compatibility so that every OSR product is generally compatible with every other OSR product. And you can have, a dozen OSR books that are all done by different people. And you can pick, mix and match stuff from all of them and use them in a campaign, right? As far as I'm concerned, obviously I run my own games more than any other games, right? But there are a ton of really incredible OSR games out there, some of which I have run, some of which I have reviewed but not run, that are really, really worthwhile. And I could spend a long time naming all of them, but I think if I just to reduce it to to my very favorites, I guess that I've very frequently come back to in a way. my two favorite OSR games are probably, that aren't mine, right? Because my own games are my favorites, obviously. That's why I made them. But the ones that aren't mine that I like the most are probably Dungeon Crawl Classics, I created a setting for it, right? World of the Last Sun, and I made it as a setting. I've never made a set of rules of World of the Last Sun because I run it with Dungeon Crawl Classics, right? And that's been the game of that campaign for almost, well, it's on its 11th year now, right? It's over 10 years old, that campaign. For people who say, oh, well, does Pundit even run anything? Like I run 4 games, and my games tend to last years, right? There's 2 of them now that have been running for like, over 4 years, I guess. So this one has been running for over 10 years. So Dungeon Crawl Classics and Lamentations of the Flame Princess, right? My Dark Albion setting, when I started running it, because first it was a campaign, then it became the setting book, and then after that, I published Lion and Dragon, right? And when I started Dark Albion, I ran it with Lamentations of the Flame Princess, which is a game I like quite a lot. I'd run previously in other occasions. Except that as I went along, I kept house ruling stuff, adding and changing stuff to make it more fitting to the kind of medieval authenticity I was looking for, until that evolved into my house rules that were so different from Lamentations that they were a totally different game, right? And the core essence of those rules appears in the appendix of Dark Albion, and then I did an expansion of that to create Lion and Dragon, which I've since been running a lot more. So I haven't run Lamentations in quite a while now, because I've kind of, Lion and Dragon takes up that niche for me. But I still think it's an incredible game, and it was the game that basically kicked off the second wave of the OSR. So even though nowadays it doesn't look super innovative by today's standards, it was crazy innovative at the time that it came out, around 2007, 2008. Other comments. Lord Sathar says, RPG Pundit is such a hipster. Well, I don't know. I don't try to be a hipster, but I guess I could be called a hipster in certain ways. People think, just in case people think like that this is like a costume or something. It's not. This is just how I dress. Like this is me dressing up special for my video appearances. And the pipe isn't an affectation. I've been smoking a pipe for 25 years now, and these are not things that I've just put on or something to make a show.
They're spectacular nonetheless for the show. So,
well, I see all the, no offense, right? But I see all these people with gaming YouTube channels that show up in like T-shirts with logos on them, like the only T-shirt I own I use to sleep in, that's it. I never wear a T-shirt, and even those don't have a logo on them.
When I was getting dressed, I said, "Oh, later today I've got to do the thing with Pundit," and I said, "I know I've heard him say." Don't wear a T-shirt. I was gonna throw on a shirt and tie just to sort of rib you a little bit, but maybe, who knows? Maybe at the end of the month for the debut of Inappropriate Characters, 30th, last Sunday of every month, for the chat that's gonna inevitably ask when we're returning. Maybe I'll throw on. You might get the shirt and ties.
There's no obligation, right? And like. I'm dressed like this right now because it's winter where I am, right? And so
right.
And I'm living in a South American country. There's no insulation here because it never gets that cold, right? It never goes below freezing. But it is chilly indoors when you don't have insulation, right? So hence I am wearing a jacket, and hence I am wearing a scarf, right? But if the time comes when I'm doing live streams in the summer, you might see me in a Hawaiian shirt, like that. That's a possibility.
We're peak summer right now, so I'm sweating.
There's no shirt and tie obligation or anything. Sapphire Dragon says, I had a literature professor claim the novel was a great trash heap of literature, referring to Moby Dick. Yeah, well, that sounds like a potentially clever literature professor. Timothy Shanks says, I had a mythology professor who stopped reading fiction. He said the real thing was too fascinating. Well, yeah, I mean, that in essence is what's happened to me, Timothy. It's been ages since I've read something that would qualify as a modern literary novel. I don't anymore. I read lots of other stuff, mythology and legends and folklore and stories and religious texts and all that sort of stuff. But I really don't have time to bother on reading novels. So, for example, some people say, oh, well, Dark Albion is based on Game of Thrones, right? But my Dark Albion campaign started before the TV show came out, and I'd never read any of the Game of Thrones novels, right? And some people are saying, well, Baptism of Fire sounds like it's just Pundit trying to do a Witcher ripoff. I have neither read the novels nor played the video game nor watched most of the TV series. Right? I watched a few episodes of the TV show when I was at Bill the Elf's house because he kind of liked it and he wanted to see what I thought, but I wasn't all that impressed, to be honest. However, it probably will look a lot like The Witcher for the same reason that Dark Albion looks a lot like Game of Thrones, because they're based on the same source material, right? The guy who wrote The Witcher used Polish history and mythology as the inspiration for The Witcher. The guy that did Game of Thrones used the War of the Roses as his inspiration for Game of Thrones, right? So I'm going back to the things that inspire these guys, right, rather than the stuff they did with it. Let's see what else we've got here. Colin Swinburne says, modern fantasy feels too big and epic most of the time. Ends with save the world and whatnot, where a lot of pulp fantasy is I got away with my skin intact and a fistful of dollars. Yeah, I mean, that's fair. There is that, and I think that is potentially one of the influences of Dungeons and Dragons on the modern fantasy novel. You could also say it's partly the influence of Hollywood, maybe, but you're right that there are fantasy novels in the earlier period, anything before let's say the late 70s, didn't always have to be like a save the world thing.
Right, and there are still some great properties that are being out there. Kevin Crawford's Scarlet Heroes comes to mind, where it's not, we're going to have riches and castles and save the world and let's do good. It's just, let's survive and hope that we can eat. So it's not exclusive, but yeah. I think you're right when you say that Dungeons and Dragons is sort of steering it that way. And, for the middle, and I call them the middle because they're not in the online sphere. They just play their game. They've been playing their game for years. All they know is Dungeons and Dragons. So, of course, that's where that core is and that thought is. So it's our job to sort of say, hey, there's other stuff that we can look at that's going to scratch that itch for you and not have it seem so cliche all the time.
Timothy Shanks says, I bought Sword and Caravan, The Old School Companion, Dark Albion, Lion and Dragon, Cults of Chaos, and several Pundit Presents PDFs. Thank you so much, Timothy. I really appreciate that. You can check out, there's still a few things on that list that aren't on that list that you can check out, so keep looking. Lord Sathar says, Robert Howard started adapting old pioneer tales and put a fantasy filter over them. That's true. That's true of a lot of American fantasy and science fiction, that one of the major influences on them were not directly mythology, but were, like cowboy novels, and Wild West stories, So when you look at a lot of the D&D settings from like the old school era, Blackmoor and Greyhawk, in many ways, they have a lot more in common with the American Wild West of American legend, anyways, than they do with the actual medieval Europe. That's not really a criticism, because obviously that they're interesting too in that way, right? But what it means is that if you think you've played European fantasy because you've played Greyhawk or the Forgotten Realms, you actually really haven't. You've played American Ren Fair fantasy with a lot of kind of American Western mythos elements to them,
You didn't have authentic Mexican, you had gringo Mexican.
Yeah, basically, it's like the Taco Bell of European fantasy. That's why I say when you play Lion and Dragon, that's when you realize that that's the first time you've actually played medieval European fantasy. Let's see what else people are saying. Reziel says, who left inappropriate characters? Joe Bittman. For personal reasons, he had a lot of stuff on his plate and he just couldn't keep up with it. So he bowed out.
And to address the elephant in the room with Diversity and Dragons, who we all know was scheduled to fill Job's shoes. I talked to him today. He's actually guesting on Nerdcognito that'll drop next week. It's not an animosity thing, and he wanted me to convey that. It's just like we talked about at first when Pundit said, how long are you going to be here? It just wasn't right. And when things aren't right, they're not right. Life comes first. So I just want to make sure that that's clear, that there's, no angst or will. We're still all good friends.
Yeah. Diversity and Dragons, actually, he recommended you as his replacement. So, it was that didn't automatically seal the deal, but it was part of what led us to give you the offer of joining IC.
Double D, you're screwed now.
But yeah, I guess it's kind of funny because he wasn't sure he could handle kind of the drama that could be caused by that came as a result of this beef with the Bro SR and Basic Expert. But then he goes and he gets on his Twitter and starts antagonizing other people. He doesn't seem to have a problem with that, but whatever. I mean, it's good that he decided that before he came on, right? Because otherwise that would have been worse. Jonathan Klinker says, could you do a book for Aztec authentic role-playing? Well, I sometimes thought about that, but it's not like totally one of my areas of expertise. It is something I did a couple of sessions interning when I was in university in Mexico at archaeological sites, Aztec and Mayan archaeological sites. So I know a little bit about it, I mean, by a little bit, I probably mean that I know more than 99% of the population, but I wouldn't consider myself an expert on it the way that I would say I'm an expert on medieval Europe or something like that. But I hear that there is someone who's making an Aztec RPG, and presumably it'll try to be authentic. So you might get your wish about that sometime soon. Judd Goswick says, "Oh, I guess working with Venger is too intimidating for some people." He says with a grin. Well, here's the thing, inappropriate characters. I when you explained, Ryan, what you think inappropriate characters about, it's about a bunch of guys talking about what they love. Well, I don't think that's actually quite right. The reason we're called inappropriate characters was at the start when it was me, Venger, and Grimjin. We were three of the most controversial figures in gaming at the time and in the OSR, right? And we were all guys that people had tried to cancel, right? So we were guys that are controversial by nature, and in that sense, I guess you'll fit right in, there's been a controversy around you that, yeah, you'll fit in quite well. Timothy Shanks says, sorry, did you want to comment on that?
No, I was going to say, I don't try to make the waves. I just end up throwing the stones in the pond, and that's the problem.
I'm sure Venture feels the same way. Timothy Shanks says, Pundit, do you run a Dark Albion or Lion Dragon campaign right now? I recall you had one on your blog years ago. Yeah, I mean, okay, so I ran the original Dark Albion campaign ran for 6.5 years, right? And played through the entire Rose War. And in the process of that campaign, I developed Dark Albion and published it in that time frame. And since then, I've run Lion and Dragon several other times. I mean, Lion and Dragon is a rule set, right? So right now, I'm using Lion and Dragon in 2 of my 4 campaigns, right? I'm running a Lion and Dragon campaign that is set in the Arthurian mythos, or in the Arthurian cycle. I'm running another Lion and Dragon campaign for Sword and Caravan right now. I've got a Sword and Caravan campaign that I'm currently running, and it's been very good. And then my other 2 games are World of the Last Sun and my Star Adventurer campaign, which is actually a Star Wars campaign where the player characters are this like group of absolute scumbags that are also on the run from the Empire, though, right? And so they're kind of like stuck in this weird middle place between the Empire and the like. This is about 10 years before the Battle of Yavin, so they're in this middle place between the Empire and the early resistance to the Empire, and mostly they're trying to just kind of profit for themselves in different ways. But, as time has gone by in that campaign, they've been more and more pushed to kind of reluctantly work with the rebellion. So it's been a very interesting campaign. It's been running for several years now.
Esoteric Order in the chat says, since when was Grim for cancel culture? And Grim was never for cancel culture. No. Pundit was saying that he was on the other end of it, where he was getting canceled. Yeah.
He had stuff censored and he was banned and, all that sort of stuff, right? That's almost one of the requisites for being an inappropriate character, is when people want to cancel you. Let's see what else here. Redfield says, I see you using a shotgun shell to tamp your pipe. No, that is not a shotgun shell. That is a specific type of pipe tamper. That's all. Dice Master says, I foresee a new version of D&D gaining traction, a non-corporate vision that everyone can back and create indie D&D. Well, in a way, that is the OSR, but in another way, it'll be very interesting to see if Wizards moves away from publishing print books and into just like trying to drive as many people as possible into their virtual tabletop. What might happen is that what is currently like the third-party 5e publishers might end up creating like their own movement, right? That becomes increasingly separate from whatever one D&D becomes,
And it's coming, on the Wizards distribution site for game shops and whatnot. They're moving towards just one SKU, which is the hybrid of the print and the digital. And that's the first step in the direction to just killing the print. And we'll talk about that down the road. But it's definitely on the horizon.
Yeah, but the nice side of the silver lining of that is that all the people that were involved in Strixhaven and what's it, the other one, the
Radiant Citadel.
All those guys are going to end up without jobs now, so that's something.
Golden Showers, they have so many.
Lord Zathar says, Pundit, will you use Sol Invictus as the de facto stand-in for Catholicism in the Polish-based RPG? No. I did that with Dark Albion at the time. I've explained this a few times already. It was I did that mainly because I was concerned that a lot of gamers might not be able to give a fair shake to medieval Christianity, right? And then over time, I kind of changed my mind about it based on seeing people's reactions to running, Dark Albion. A lot of people just did it and just, because literally it was the medieval Catholic Church with the serial number crossed off. That's it, right? So, for example, Sword and Caravan is set in the Third Crusade from 1190 to about 1220. So the Third, Fourth, and Fifth Crusades, technically, and along the events that happened on the Silk Road, culminating at the end with the invasion of the Mongols that destroy everything. And in Sword and Caravan, you have Christians and Jews and Muslims. You don't have there are no serial numbers crossed off. And Baptism of Fire is going to be set at the dawn of the Piast dynasty in Poland, the beginning of Poland as a nation. And what happened at the beginning of Poland as a nation? It starts with what's called the Baptism of Poland, which is when the chief Mieszko, who was also a Grand Duke of the Holy Roman Empire, is converted to Christianity, and then begins the process of converting Poland, which was a very difficult process because there was a lot of enormous pushback from different groups of disgruntled pagans. And so, that game, just like Sword and Caravan, it has to be Christianity. You have to have Christianity versus paganism there, and it's going to be very much that. So no, I'm not going to use any stand-ins. Let's see what else here. I always fall really behind on the chat, right? Because I give long answers to stuff, and then more people add things. Chris Miller says, I used to live in India, and that culture and mythos make a huge impact on my historical interest in my own writing. Yeah, well, that's the thing also, like outside of European myth, folklore, and legend, there's this enormous wealth of other incredible influences that a lot of people don't access. Esoteric Order of Nerdity says, I really don't like the Basic Expert having had Jethro the Vacuous on his channel, but I really like his other content. Yeah, I mean, like I said, he makes interesting videos, you know, like especially his live streams. What else have we got?
Some folks talking about the Orc, which I don't know if you read it. I did. I found it wholly unremarkable. It's a whole lot of nothing. I've said my piece about it when they first released it. I don't know that Paizo is going to be the savior of the Sparkle Troll if Wizards goes away. You know, they're certainly poised for it, but Paizo still makes money, and there's a point where they have to balance how much they're going to pander versus what's profitable, where Wizards can bleed money because they're still attached to Hasbro. The Orc is it's super generic. There's nothing remarkable about it.
The Orc only made sense when, you know, the OGL 1.1 looked like it was going to happen and be crap, right? As soon as Wizards caved and made everything Creative Commons, now the Orc really doesn't have any purpose. You know?
Right. The Orc was great PR. Kobold Press did the same thing. They were at the right place at the right time and released the right statement. But there's nothing there.
Like both Paizo and Kobold, they probably sold more in those months than they had in years, you know.
Yep. And then 2 months later, Kobold was the first one that showed their true colors. No, we're still going to produce exclusively 5th edition. So how much did it really matter? No, it didn't. It got you clicks. It got you purchases. And that's fine. Just say so. Just say so.
I mean, to be fair, it would have mattered if Wizards had got their way, right? So Charles Anderson says, you mentioned Sword and Caravan being a campaign book. Does it include the rules to play? No, Sword and Caravan is set up. I mean, it's set up so that ideally you run it with Lion and Dragon, but you can use, like, it's a setting book. There's very little rules material in it. There's lots of random generators for the setting and stuff like that. There are some stats for creatures and things like that are, you know, OSR stats, so you can use them in any system. So you can run them with any kind of D&D based game, right? But Sword and Caravan is not itself a game. It's a campaign setting the way Dark Albion is a campaign setting. Baptism of Fire will be a complete game. It'll be kind of like my expanded edition Lion and Dragon. It's going to be Lion and Dragon with the same rules, but adding material that has shown up since then in like the old school companion and stuff like that. And there are a few changes that are going to be done to fit the setting of early medieval Poland rather than late medieval England, right? So it is going to be a full product. Let's see what else here. Chris Miller says, I wonder if after WotC stops publishing books, the majority of printers will go under or scale back. Will that make prices go up for us? Will they ruin print books for everyone else? I don't really think so, because I don't think WotC alone is the you know, is a major. I mean, I'm sure it contributes, but it's not a major, like, it's not central to independent print on demand printing or anything like that, which is what most small press or RPG companies do, right? Like, very few companies do print runs of anything. They do print on demand, right? So, like, I'm pretty sure all of my publishers do print on demand. I don't think those are going to go away anytime soon.
Right. WotC ceasing to print books is different than Penguin ceasing to print books. So
yeah, that would be a little bit of a different crisis. Yeah. Let's see what else we've got here. Chris Miller says, what's everyone's thoughts on Modiphius and their super woke stance on gameplay? Well, I did a whole video about that, are you familiar with what's been going on with Modiphius, Ryan?
I have to be, yes. Here's the thing. Their games, when I talk about specifically to the 2D20 system, are good. They have good licensing bones. It really sucks that they're putting themselves in a position that's going to be indefensible for some. There's always the place where right now you can hold your nose and buy one of their games. One of my games, I run a couple of games and I play in a few games. One of the games that I'm actually a player in for one of the co-hosts of Nerd Cognito, he runs it, is their Fallout system. And it is what it is. We like the IP. We want to play the IP. It's a semi-solid game. There's some, but not getting into the game review, looking at their politics. They're getting into the territory now where I don't know that I can keep holding my nose and purchasing their stuff. Cthulhu doesn't give a damn about your pronouns. And it's just insane because, like, everyone that's sort of in that whole woke train, they're just going down the tracks. I am concerned that they are pandering to a smaller audience than they think. There is a huge, quiet middle group in our segment that isn't going to stand for this, and you're going to get to the territory where it's not just going to be folks that are vocal about what's going on, but you're going to get to the place where folks that aren't vocal about it are going to say, I'm going to look for a different system because I don't want to give my money to these people. Meatball, hello.
If you were wondering where Meatball was, she's sleeping on my bag here. There we go. Had to do the Meatball cameo while you were talking.
No, that's fine. I surprisingly, I have 3 potential intruders, and they're all staying. I think they're probably all asleep by now, so they're upstairs. No Cognito Hound Dog, nor either of the felines have paid us a visit tonight. So,
so a dog and 2 cats. All right.
Yeah.
You don't quite qualify as a cat lady. All right, so Esoteric Order of Nerdity says, Pundit, what do you think about using Lion and Dragon to play an Arthurian myth and legend a la King Arthur Pendragon? Well, I'm currently running a Pendragon, well, not a Pendragon, but an Arthurian campaign, and obviously the Great Pendragon campaign is material that I'm using as influence for that. So, yeah, you can absolutely use Lion and Dragon for that, right? Charlotte Williams says, will Baptism of Fire be done in the style of, say, Pendragon, where the story of King Arthur plays out and the players have freedom but can't necessarily change the story? No, I mean, it's going to be done basically in the style of Dark Albion or Sword and Caravan, where both of them, what they have is it sets up the setting, and then it also has a timeline of potential future events that are based on what actually happened in history, right? And then you can do whatever you want with that. Like, you can ignore completely that timeline, or you can use it as a guide to your play. And of course, it depends, whether you're playing, on a kind of day-by-day basis campaign, or a campaign where, like, it's more episodic or something. So time might go by and new events happen that are based on historical events. But it's not going to be like something that is automatically intricately connected to the great events in history. Presumably, your characters are going to be, it's kind of set up where the default assumes that your characters are at least not unfriendly to the Piast crown, and are almost certainly Christians, right? And that you are assisting in some way in that process of the Christianization of Poland, which can include possibly fighting pagans, but also, going to all these dark places. Poland in this time had a very small population density, and so it was this country that was full of, like, it had these tiny areas where there was towns and cities. Like, the biggest cities were like, maybe 8,000 people, right? They were tiny. And then around them for about a day's journey, there were little villages and farms. And then there was huge swaths wilderness, and there were monsters in that wilderness, and there were witches, and there were all sorts of horrific creatures and things that had to be fought if you were going to bring the light of Christian civilization to the Slavic world, right? That's kind of the principle of it. Which is not to say you can't play a pagan. You can, and there's opportunities to do that if that's how you want to run the campaign. Anyway. The Dice Master asked an interesting question. Is there a point where a low-priced, accessible RPG in PDF is too cheap to draw interest? That's a very, very interesting question, because I think that there's definitely some RPGs that price themselves too high for what they should be, even in terms of like ideal profit, right? Because like there's a simple rule in terms of what you price something, is that if you're pricing it too low, you're probably missing an opportunity to make more money, because somebody might have been willing to pay, I don't know, let's say you price something at $9 and they would have been willing to pay 15. So that's profit you're losing there, right? But there's also definitely a certain limit point where if you go past that, you're going to lose a whole bunch of profit, even because you've got a higher price point, but it means way less people are going to buy it, right? But I think that low-priced products, the only thing that they have is like there's this risk that people will think that if they're low price, it's because they're low quality, right? So for me, I always try with my publishers, and ultimately it's their decision what final price point is put in any of my games, right? So, but I always try to, in my kind of negotiation with the publisher, to say, well, let's try to put this at the lowest possible price where we make a decent profit, but that it doesn't become unaccessible to the people who would want to buy it, right? And so that's why, like Lion and Dragon is, I think it's like what, $20, right? Like it's a very affordable book. The soft cover black and white is $15.81, and the hardcover is $22.98. So there you go. Now, of course, that one's been out for a while, so if that came out now, it would probably be more expensive. But
that's universal for pricing too.
You need to figure out how to convince a person if your RPG product is an affordable, is a low price, let's say, that what they're paying for is worth it, right? And so that's word of mouth more than anything else, I think. I don't know if you feel differently about that, Ryan. Tell me. But...
No. I was saying you're right on the money, and it's not just exclusively for role playing. It's in every industry. If you underprice to the point where it's a detriment to your product, it can be very problematic. And if you are over, people are going to feel that they didn't get their money's worth. So finding the sweet spot is tough. And I often look at some of these designers, most of them are just starting out. They're on itch, and they're giving their stuff away. And I applaud the thought behind it, but I question the motivation, because when you see a free product that's not an established product, Castles and Crusades gives away their PHB. Wonderful, brilliant strategy. They have a library of other stuff you're going to buy. When you're an independent creator and you have 2 titles and they're both pay what you want, people are going to raise an eyebrow as to what level of design commitment do you have to it, and is this a quality product? So you got to watch. You just got to really watch.
Yeah. Samuel Buchanan asks, how's the legality for making supplements for your games, Pundit? So if I made setting books or races for Star Adventure, or perhaps Evil Aligned player races for Lion and Dragon, I've always been very clear about this, that my material, I'm happy for people to make supplements for it, right? And so there have been a couple of supplements, for example, that have been done for Star Adventure in particular, that came out in like the OSR HIO jam that Taylor Lane managed. So that you can absolutely do that, and I mean, if you want me to endorse it, then you kind of have to take a look and decide if I like it or not, right? But what you can't do basically is without the publisher's permission, you can't rip off, say, like the logo as it appears, like, you know, the Sword and Caravan logo, right? You can't use this unless Mad Scribe says it's okay, right? And you can't cut and paste directly the material from the published books, but you can make reference to the product. All my stuff is open for that, you know, and you can say, you know, in your book, this is a supplement for Star Adventure or for Lion and Dragon. You know, I don't have any problem with that at all. Esoteric Order of Nerdity says, Pundit, how are you holding up with the water situation in Uruguay? Okay, so for people who don't know, right, because it's shown up now in like some international news that it's been like completely wrong, that says like, because of a drought, the water is running out in Uruguay or something like that. It's not actually what's happening at all. What is happening is that in Montevideo, in the capital city of Uruguay, where I am, there's been a long period of drought that has lowered the water level of the river and a particular dam of that river that provides fresh water in the water system to Montevideo. And so they've had to mix that with water from the Rio de la Plata, which is a saltwater river because it's actually like the delta that goes out into the Atlantic Ocean. And what that means is that, you know, like I turn on my taps, there's water. There absolutely is. It's just water that has a very high sodium content, right? So it's still drinkable, but very salty. And so, like, I mean, I guess if you have like hypertension or something like that, it's probably not recommended. But you know, I'm just using bottled water anyways, because what Uruguay has is that it has enormous reserves of underground aquifers, like, and there's just like unbelievable amounts of relatively very inexpensive, very high quality mineral water that you can get here. So it hasn't really been a problem for me. And it's like, there is no, like the taps are not dry here, right? Like people can still use water for everything, including, you know, if say there's people that can't afford to be buying mineral water to replace, you know, for cooking or stuff like that, you can still use it. It's just saltier than it probably should be. And they're now working on fixing it. So, you know, it's a product of the fact that for the last 40 years, they haven't changed their the infrastructure of their water system at all. And in that time, you know, like the population of the city has almost doubled. So like it was a disaster waiting to happen. You know, it just took one kind of lengthy drought and that did it. So you know, and the current government is blaming the previous government. The previous government is blaming the current government. But the fact is that for like they should have been looking at this from like the late 80s, and nobody did because it was just money they wanted to spend that money on other things, you know. But no, it's not a big deal. It's not a problem. Not for me especially, because of all that gaming money that you guys send me when you buy my books. So thank you for that. Reziel says, I find that most of the big game studio prices are too high for me. I won't pay $60 for a D&D book anymore. OSR stuff is usually much better. Well, yeah, I think one of the things, though, is like it's a question of quality, right? Like there are some OSR games that are in the, you know, $45 to $70 range, maybe, right? And some of those might not be worth it, but some of them certainly are. But usually, in my experience, I think that like WotC products are all overpriced, right? Like I think they would have been smarter to do like a more inexpensive version of the core books, for example. But there we go.
But they're not going to give up the full color and all of the stuff that they want because they're the flagship, and they truly believe that. And to an extent they are, because if you say, oh, you know, I have a group of guys that comes around and we play elves and dwarves and wizards, they're going to say, oh, you play Dungeons and Dragons, right? So I get it. I think that they're overpriced for the quality level of the actual print compared to if I were to buy an independently produced full color product at that page count from anyone. I'm going to get a higher quality print than I get from in particular the the most recent WotC stuff that's come out. It's poor. It just feels
isn't it?
yeah.
Timothy Shanks says, Lion and Dragon's probably the only OSR game I would ever buy. I have no use for DCC, Sword and Wizardry, etc. Well, Timothy, I hope you'll check out Baptism of Fire. There'll be lots of stuff in there that isn't in Lion and Dragon. That kind of adds to the game. Jonathan Klinkner says, not to be that guy, but do you think woke pandering will ever die out? What do you think, Brian?
Yes, the political pendulum has to swing back. And I think that we've seen glimpses that it's going to start to swing back. Now, whether we've hit the full extension or not, I can't say, but it has to get better. People are starting to see through this. They're starting to see the transparency of it. They're starting to see that there's not conviction as opposed to corporate persuasion. Read, profits, ESG, that sort of thing. Without getting super into that end of it, folks are just getting fed up. And at some point, the rose-colored glasses have to come off. Specifically in the States, we've got this inflation that is driving the point home for the average family right now. So there's going to come a point in time where the fees are going to go to the wayside when you're having trouble buying groceries. And then we're going to look and see, where are we at? Why are we not producing food? Why are we not producing energy? What's the one common thread in all of this? Boom. And it'll swing the other way. So maybe I'm being optimistic because it's so fucking miserable right now, but I really do believe it's going to go the other way around.
Well, I've been thinking that wokeism was going to collapse. I've been thinking that since 2014, man. So now I'm actually at the point where I think what is happening, because as a guy who's been fighting this fight for longer than almost anyone in the OSR, what I know is that back in the time between 2014 and let's say 2016 or so, it was a very lonely fight, right? There was only a tiny number of us who are standing up to these people, and now there's a lot of people who are standing up to these people. But what I think is going to happen is not that wokeism is just going to collapse, but rather that now you're seeing a polarization where there's woke and anti-woke movements the anti-woke movements have now gained ground and have and are presenting basically alternatives that prove to be, as a rule, more commercially successful, and so that will certainly influence a lot of companies to also drop wokeism, but not all of them. Some of them because they've been so deeply infiltrated by woke entryism, and some of them because of the pressure from for corporations from DEI investment and all that stuff. So I think that what you're going to see is all over society. It's going to break into camps, in every area of culture. You're going to have woke and anti-woke stuff that are going to be pushed, and I think generally the anti-woke stuff will end up being much more popular among the normal people crowd, in the same way that most people feel that anti-woke comedians are a hell of a lot funnier than woke comedians, stuff like that. Nobody watches Saturday Night Live anymore, right? But everybody watches Dave Chappelle. So the proof is in the pudding. But the other side will continue to linger and continue to have a presence because of their undue level of political and social influence among the managerial class. So I think we're in for a long period of cultural civil war here.
I agree. I don't think it's going to be soon, but I have a 7-year-old son, right? I can hope that when he is my age it's going to be on the other end of that swing. What a downer. What else we got in the chat?
Let's see here. Raziel says, everything Disney is making is just failing miserably, and I'm thrilled. Yeah, like, Jesus. Like, one would think that, like, the Little Mermaid thing would have been, like, the death knell of that, but then you've seen these pictures of, like, what they're doing with Snow White, and it's just... No, they're doubling down all over again, you know.
And she is smoking hot. She's just not Snow White. I mean... Oh...
Yeah, absolutely. Never mind that, you know, it's not the seven dwarves anymore, you know, it's the seven
right. Mythical creatures or whatever they're going to bring out.
That's just so ridiculous. Sam Vasco says, please mention the OSR HQ before you end the show, Pundit. All right. So the OSR HQ is a Facebook group that is a anti-woke RPG, specifically OSR. Facebook group. So if you don't know about it, check it out and consider joining it. It's a good group for talking about OSR stuff without, you know, because most of the RPG groups on Facebook tend to be actively woke. And the ones that aren't in other contexts, like, you know, like Tenkar's Tavern, he's got a Tenkar's Tavern Discord, Tenkar's Tavern Mewe, and Tenkar's Tavern Facebook. And the Facebook one blocks anything that has any criticism of woke stuff, right? Like they just, and they do it as a survival tactic. I understand that. I'm not blaming Tenkar for that, right? But like you can make the same post and you put it on the Mewe and it works, right? You talk about it on Discord and it's allowed. I assume I don't spend a lot of time in Tenkar's Discord, but if you put it on Facebook, they'll block it. You know, they won't let it out because, you know, it's too dangerous, I guess. Calvin Oni asks, how old is Ryan?
Old enough.
Fair enough.
I've got less on the clock than you think. I'm in my 40s. Let's just put it that way. I'm looking closer to 50 than I am at 40.
Sapphire Dragon says, I think woke would have fallen a while ago if it had not been actively held up by a massive amount of money. Well, you know, this is the thing, right? Is that you remember around 2008, you had Occupy Wall Street, right? At the very start of that movement, that was a broad-scale movement in areas of American society that included people that would later become part of kind of the Trump movement on the one side and people that would later become wokeists on the other. And they were united in their condemnation of the money managerial class, right? Of these people that had basically destroyed the economy with, you know, this grift and nepotism and financial speculation. And I think that what happened there is that the big corporations and the investors and all this stuff, they looked at this and I said, we have to stop this, right? And so they said, well, what are we going to do? Instead of getting them angry at the 1%, let's make them be angry at each other, right? Let's push these fanatics on the left that think that race and not class are the central issue of you know, injustice in our society, and that gender and sexuality are what is necessary to emphasize to change our society, and not getting rid of the corrupt, useless people at the top of our oligarchy that have been mismanaging our civilization since at least the 1960s, you know. And by doing that as a distraction tactic, that's why these big firms like BlackRock invested essentially in wokeness, not because any of them believe it. You know, like I watched you know, I'm not a huge fan of Andrew Tate by any means, but I watched his interview with Tucker Carlson. He said something very clever, which is that, you know, if you see these, if you happen to be at a reunion of billionaires and there's like a black billionaire and a white billionaire, they're not going to start talking about race. It means nothing to them, right? Like it doesn't matter. So they both understand that what matters is, you know, class, right? And so the race is irrelevant to that, you know, and but they want it to matter to you, you know, and that's why they promoted these marginal freaks, these psychopathic lunatics that until then had been basically trapped since the early 90s era of political correctness in the faculties of universities and loosed them out into all of society like a plague of locusts. It was basically so that it distracts from the fact that they are essentially bankrupting our entire civilization for their own benefit, because they have no longer have any vested interest in the well-being of the rest of our society, right? They're not tied to that. Like in the old days, I'm not saying that the people who ran the world in the 19th century were all good people, but they all had an inherent vested interest in that their place has to do good, because everything they had was invested in that place. And now that isn't true, right? So that's where you get the problem. And there you go. There's my political diatribe for the evening. Captain of the Red Nerd Guard says, is there a link for, I almost said the Red Guard. The Nerd Guard says, is there a link for OSRHQ? I don't know. I think I don't have it handy, so you'll probably have to, you just have to search for it on Facebook. I'm sure that you'll find it. Lord Sathar says that the seven dwarves look like the road company of Godspell. That's great. Raziel says, introduce diversity politics. Yeah, that's essentially what they did as a way to stop everyone from being angry at what the 1% did. And I know this because I hang around those guys, so. All right, so anybody have any other final questions for Ryan? I've got a question for him, but I want to see if anyone has any last things to add before we close out here.
Yeah, get him in now. I turn into a pumpkin. It's late for me.
I could go on forever, but at some point you've got to stop it, right? All right, so my question for you is, in the new lineup of inappropriate characters, you are now the inappropriate character who is the chubbiest, and who also at the same time has the most hair. So where do you think that puts you in terms of the ladder of dominance in inappropriate characters? Yeah,
it's a wash, right? This and this. And this is short for me right now. So I guess if we get stimped at any point in time, I can do the Fabio, right?
Yeah, so. Yeah. Venger loses the hair battle. But
I like to eat. I like to eat. So, but here, personal review.
More fun of Venger, or should we make more fun of you? I guess that's the question.
It's a carousel. It's just whoever's turn it is in the barrel, right?
I guess so. All right, a couple more comments. Eric C., favorite RPG of all time. What's your favorite RPG of all time, Ryan?
See, this is what I hate about favorite questions, because as we morph through life, our tastes and the things that we like have changed. I'm going to throw it back to my first love of a campaign and a setting and the things that I did. And it's not so much the system as it is the nostalgia and the memories and the good times and the reason that we all play, friends and creating this world. My first major campaign was Spelljammer, the second edition, right? But it was so monumental to cementing me into this hobby that I can always look back on it and have nothing but great feelings. So I've mentally associated the two. So that's where I go when I'm forced to pick a favorite, because things change. In the third edition era, I had a blast with third edition. In the modern era, I'm rediscovering all of these things that went by me as a child through the OSR. I'm seeing new stuff that comes out that's phenomenal. So it's a barometer for a moment in time. So I have to default to where my heart sort of fell for the hobby, and that's where that is.
Okay. Well, for me, the answer is simple: Lion and Dragon.
Oh.
That's my favorite one. That's why I made it. And in a bigger sense, the underlying system of Lion and Dragon, which is also used in the Invisible College, and it's also used in Star Adventure. It's the same system but modified. But yeah, that is my favorite. Chaos Druid says RPG Pundit agree with using history culture to make fantasy. Made a Meta Barons Dune style mini campaign based off the Indigo Revolt of 1859. My players are still wanting to go back to it years later. Well, that sounds really interesting, actually. Lord Sathar gives you some advice here. He says, establish dominance, punch Venture in the face right away. So apparently is under the same rules as what happens when you go to prison, right? First day in prison, you got to punch somebody right away.
Find the biggest, baldest, gypsiest earring wearing guy and punch him right in the face.
Yeah, there you go. Timothy Shank says, I don't think Pundit likes the story system very well. No, I don't. Matthew Gay says, what do you think of Spelljammer? I guess that's for me. I was never a huge fan of Spelljammer, but that's because I liked Mystara, and Mystara had its own like flying ships thing in the Princess Arc series. I like that a lot better.
And Eric, you hated Spelljammer, so
hey, diversity. He said, can't wait to see you guys all together. Well, thank you very much. I hope you'll guest star one of these days, Double D. What else here? Timothy Shank says, I used Spelljammer for about a year after it came out and sunk a lot of money into that crap and then waved it away and said never happened and went back to using Amulets of the Plains. Well, Diversity, you got here just when we're about to like finish here, I think, unless anyone has any last questions or comments to add. Somebody asked if I have exotic pets. No, I've only ever had cats, and I've only ever had one cat at a time until by like weird accident I ended up with two, which was Meatball and Big Chungus, who were sisters, right? Now Big Chungus has passed away. Poor one out for Chungus. Meatball is still very healthy for a cat of 13 years. But in the future, I will again only have probably one cat at a time. I don't have the patience for exotic pets, and I've never seen the point. Like I've never seen the point of having a pet tarantula, like or something like that. No pet reptiles, no, Jonathan Clinker. Some people liked it. Sapphire Dragon says Spelljammer was my jam back in the day. John Carroll, to both of you, OSR Star Wars. Well, Star Adventurer, which you talk about an inexpensive game. It's only a rule set, right? But it's a rule set that was set up for my Star Wars campaign, right? And you can get Star Adventurer in print for $9.99, right? Now it's also only about 40 pages long. It's a short book that has everything you need for like a set of rules for space opera style play, and it was specifically what I made for a Star Wars game, right? So, that is my OSR Star Wars. What about you? Are you a Star Wars guy, Ryan?
It's all right. I don't love it. I'm not. I was always a Star Trek guy as opposed to the Star Wars. You watch both, but I do remember playing the D20 version. I did not play the OSR 2D6 Star Wars. So look, I just did it. I put the OSR label on it. I don't know if the original Star Wars would qualify. I guess it does, sort of.
Which one do you mean? You mean like the one by West End Games?
Yeah.
That wasn't a 2D6 system. That was a dice pool system. So it's definitely not
D&D. So it is not OSR.
I mean, it's an old school game in that it came out in the 80s, right? But it's definitely not a D&D based.
See, and there you go. With Star Wars, boom. I was just lamenting to our friend in the chat, Double D, earlier today, sneak peek for the Nerd Cognito episode that's going to drop. I'm going to plug it. It drops on Tuesday. So if you're not subscribed to Nerd Cognito, find us on any podcast player of your choice. We're everywhere, Apple, Spotify, Google, you name it. We have a discussion about the Star Trek Adventures Modifius game. So I I was always more
Did they
into
have
Star
that
Trek.
license, or did they lose that one too?
I don't think they still have the license. They just put out a new solo book, and that's sort of where our discussion started from. So, I don't think that the license is going anywhere. At least I haven't read it. It might be, and Chad will tell me if I'm wrong. I own it when I'm wrong, but I haven't heard anything about that license expiring, and I know they just released this new book, so we'll see. In fact, it's not yet released. It'll release today or tonight at midnight or tomorrow at midnight. So it's some sort of Captain Solo RPG thing, and
Okay.
we'll see.
Right.
We'll see.
Esoteric Order of Nerdity asks, Pundit, what's the reasoning behind using charisma as the modifier for saving throws in the Invisible College? Well, that's the rule in all of the Lion and Dragon derived books. Charisma also modifies critical hit table rolls. And the reason for that is, well, there's a mechanical reason and also kind of a non-mechanical reason, which is that the mechanical reason is that it gives charisma a little more to do, but also because in my experience, people who are charismatic also, at least partially, are lucky. And so, I've always thought that charisma in the real world is one of the most important stats you can have. It's hugely significant to your effectiveness in the world. So I wanted to make sure that there was an emphasis on that. But because, obviously I don't have social skills in the game, right? You can't just do a charisma check to convince someone or something like that. Like, to me, that is stepping outside of the OSR kind of limitations, right? I wanted to make it clear that, charisma is not something that's just kind of used because, it shouldn't just be useful for like retainer loyalty or something like that, which is also part of why I expanded the role of reaction roles in my campaigns, which I've now published as the Social Encounters on the Silk Road, which is not really a product exclusively for Sword and Caravan at all, but rather is like a rule set for using reaction roles as the basis of social interaction checks for DMs without having to have social skills, without having to, like, some guy rolls a diplomacy check and he has +10 so he can do anything, right? Not without that sort of nonsense, So yeah, it was to emphasize the importance of charisma, basically. What else have we got here? Some people like and some dislike WEG Star Wars. I never cared for it much, to be honest. So my favorite official Star Wars was, I guess, D20 revised. All right, I think we're about ready to wrap it up here. I'm sorry if I've kept you. Venger would be unconscious on the chair right now, but all right. Well, thank you very much for coming, and we're looking forward to, once again, in case people missed that, our first. Well, in 2 weeks from now, basically, the 30th of July will be our first new season episode of Inappropriate Characters, the new era, the third era of Inappropriate Characters with a new lineup. You still got the same 2 lead guitarists, but we got a new drummer, and we'll see how it goes. But I'm willing to put in my hope that this time we're actually going to be able to start without technical issues. We'll see. This is
River. I get a pass on episode 1.
This is the triumph of hope over experience.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for the wonderful, wonderful welcome from the chat. I look forward to talking to you guys. The links are in the chat for all of the stuff, Inappropriate Characters, the Twitter, the YouTube channel, and if you want to throw a couple of bones to help us kill the duck and have a nice, clean stream, we certainly appreciate that too. Check it out. It was spectacular for all of the old faces that I know and love that have listened to my bullshit forever. Thank you. And for those of you that are just in for it now, welcome aboard. If you want to hear more of my bullshit, you can follow me on the Twitter machine. I'm at I Hate Ryan David. So it's real simple, and I put it right out there, right up front. So.
That's a totally inappropriate character name, you know. So there we are. All right, guys.
Thanks for having me on, Pundit. Had a blast.
Obviously, we won't be doing a live stream for the next couple of weekends, but because inappropriate characters. But there'll be more live streams coming up next month, so keep your eyes open. I'll try to send messages in advance. Thank you to everyone who watched, and we'll see you all soon. Oh, currently smoking. Well, just finished smoking. A Ben Wade Rhodesian with Argento Polonia. Take care, everyone. How do I end this? I never know how to finish this.
This won't happen on inappropriate characters.
There we go. I think we got an ending stream. There we go.